Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be taking you through the FIDE Candidates 2026. Now in this tournament, obviously everyone knows who has won, at least everyone who follows chess, but his name was Javokhir Sindarov. And Sindarov is from Uzbekistan and he's not really that high profile of a player until now. He's actually just 2745 and the favorites for this tournament were obviously the number two and number three players in the world, which were Hikaru Nakamura and Fabiano Caruana from America. And we also had Indian uh, prodigy Praggnanandhaa. And we also had some wild cards like Andrei Esipienko, Matthias Bluebaum, and of course the legendary draw master Adi Shigiri. And rounding out the tournament, we had Wei Yi, who I believe is from China and holds the record for the holding the youngest, becoming grandmaster at the youngest age. Um, I think at around 12, early 12 years old. So yeah, Sindarov facing a pretty unique field and also pretty good field. But yeah, let's see. I mean, going into this tournament, most people were not expecting him to do so great, but obviously that is what I'm going to be highlighting is Sindarov's performance. Let's get into the game. So obviously his first round was against Andrei Esipienko, and so it begins as a queen's gambit declined. So white develops his bishop, pointing at this weakness over there, and black gets rid of it off of that square, challenges white's center, all pretty logical. And he gains a little bit of space on the queen side, so occupying these squares, maybe a knight could hop in there later on. And he goes after white's bishop, who has to go into a position where it can be taken by black's knight um, either way. So the point of bishop e5 is obviously to provoke f6 and weaken this diagonal, which, as we'll see later, could be a problem for black. But right now black is covering with the bishop. And all pretty standard stuff. Black is expanding on the queen side for counterplay. White is trying to get his pieces on the king side. But actually, I think already, I don't think at this stage Javokhir was actually not very happy with this position because his bishop is kind of, it's in the center, but what is it really doing? It's just attacking this pawn, which is defended by the king. And it's kind of locked in here. It's not really doing much. Whereas black has dark square bishop is a much better piece. And as we'll see, this bishop has much more potential than white's bishop. So already not a very great position for, at least with the white pieces, you want to get a decisive advantage by this stage of the game. But it doesn't look like, at least from the way this game is going, that white really has any advantage. But he is improving the position of his king. Black is trying to improve the position of his pawn chain here. But the problem is, this bishop is now in an excellent diagonal, controlling the e1 square, preventing white from expanding on the e file and adding. So this rook is now basically on a free file. This rook is not connected with this, and in chess you always want your rooks connected. There'll always be a plus side. And then this bishop is also pitting the knight, so black's pieces are definitely better here. And by this stage, I would already prefer black's position. So Andre actually putting a lot of pressure on Javokhir. You notice he only has 16 minutes on his clock at this stage of the game, so clearly the odds not looking in his favor. But right around here, Andre goes wrong. It makes absolutely no sense to give away this bishop for this knight because it is pinned and it can't move. And even if the queen goes off the diagonal, it'd be much more beneficial to black to trade off the bishops instead of the bishop for knight, because white's pawns are all fixed on dark squares. So trading off bishops here will actually be helpful because you only have one bishop and it can attack all these weaknesses later on in the game. This is a very long-term calculation, but this was definitely a mistake and actually brought Javokhir back to pretty much equality, although I still would be a little bit preferable to black's position, but not after this last move, bishop e6. Now, the idea obviously behind Andre's move was to take on d4 and, or basically, yeah, take on d4, and he didn't really think there was a feasible way to defend it. But rook a6 came, which is obviously a great move because if bishop takes on d4, then black has rook takes c6, which undermines the support for the bishop. So that is not good. And if knight takes d4, as played in the game, white has queen h5. Obviously, the queen attacked by the knight, and you don't want to take because the bishop takes and escapes the rook's sight. But now if the bishop moves, let's say to c5, then there is rook takes h6, threatening rook h8 mate. And if pawn takes the rook, then queen g6 will lead to mate shortly. So Andre has to get rid of that bishop. You notice it has actually become a very threatening piece now. And now he is actually lost. But both sides only had about 5 minutes left, so this game could turn either way. And I'd only slightly prefer white here because this knight is very strong and black does have a very strong center. But here's another critical moment. Andre took with this pawn. Wrong one. He should have taken with this pawn and opened up the queen's diagonal. That means these pieces would actually come to life. Black can activate on the d file, and that would give him some practical chances in the game. He took with the other pawn, and the bishop got into the game. And now white's pieces are just too active. The queen is snuck in. The rook is coming to e8. The bishop is attacked. The bishop moved, but the rook came to e8 anyways. And now you can see this rook is also ready to transport. As we'll see later on, the queen is checking, supported by the rook. And the bishop comes in, getting ready to give checks, pressurizing this pawn. And obviously there's no counterplay for black. He tries to play c3, but queen e8, just to repeat to get closer to the time control. Now once the time control has been reached, a brilliant move to finish off the game, rook e6. Now obviously if this is threatening rook e8 check, followed by taking the queen and delivering checkmate on e8. And if knight takes rook, then bishop takes. And after king f8, queen f7 is mate. And if king h8, then queen check, bishop check, the king can't come out. It's a well-known mating pattern. And checkmate. So that wraps up the first game. So with that, Javokhir actually is tied for first right now with 1 point, tied with Caruana and Praggnanandhaa, who beat Giri, and Caruana won against Nakamura in a very tragic endgame. And moving on to game 2 is really not that much to review. I think Javokhir was just happy he won a game. He was definitely worse than last game, so both sides went for a very solid line, not really much going on. You can see Javokhir is not really pressing at all in this game either. If anyone has something to play for, it is black because he occupies the open e-file, and he can easily get this bishop in the game via g7, and this bishop is not really doing anything at the moment. But there's no serious disadvantage. Javokhir plays sensibly and just trades off the active pieces that black has, like that bishop, and black in return has obviously doubled white's pawn, but it's enough of a balance for this game to be even. Obviously, white has the two bishops, and this bishop is not too bad here. Obviously, f5 is always going to be in the air. Same with g4, so black has to watch out for that, which is why knight g7 was played. And eventually, they basically liquidated to a drawn position with bishop takes f5, check, pawn takes g6. And if the rook goes back, then you have g7, followed by g8. And then you'll eventually get the knight by force. So they decided not to really bother. Matatias just brought his king into the game because he's getting this pawn anyways. And here we had a threefold repetition and a draw agreed. So at this stage of the game, no one is actually at 2 points. I think all the other games are drawn in round 2. So with that, Javokhir is still tied for first place. And he goes on to one of his worst opponents in terms of results, which is Ramesh Babu Praggnanandhaa. And Praggnanandhaa had white. Now this is probably the first game I saw where I was like, dang, this guy is a serious player. He definitely has a chance of winning this thing based on the way he's playing, because he's playing relatively simply and accurately. And so it's a similar opening to the first game from his white side, but Praggnanandhaa is playing for b4 and to attack this strong bishop on this diagonal and dislodge it. And he's hoping that to claim this diagonal for his bishop unopposed. Or at the very least, exchange black's bishop off for his good bishop. So obviously both sides developing here, and bishop g5 obviously threatens his pawn, or at least threatens to isolate it, because you can't take back with a knight because of this pin. So pawn to d4, takes, and knight e4. Now this is all preparation, obviously. Queen f5 is a must move here, because if knight takes bishop, queen takes c2, and black is on the queen. So that's the idea behind avoiding this. And now he plays b4. He could have played bishop d3, Pragnananda. It's a more safe way of playing. But it looks like he wanted to go all out because he is at 1.5 points. So he wanted to go out for a win against somebody who he has a pretty good score against. I think he's won like most of their individual games. So it makes sense that he would, I guess in retrospect, obviously it doesn't. Or maybe he should have played safer. But one thing Javokhir did great in this game is he began moving very quickly. You'll see already there's a 10-minute time gap. And as the... Oops. Okay, as the position goes, he obviously isolates White's pawn. So that's another weakness. And then Queen steps out of any discoveries here from the bishop. And the White pawn takes back, so now g2 is defended. Obviously that was threatened, and that would also be threatening the rook. So f5, brilliant, or not brilliant, but like really good move because it shuts out this bishop. And already Pragnananda was way down the clock. You can see he's down to 37 minutes, and we're only on move 17. So as more time ticks, the more difficult this position gets. And yeah, queen c3 was definitely a mistake because of Javokhir's next move, which was e5. And that's definitely something that Pragnananda missed, because you cannot take this pawn because queen f6 and that knight is going to be lost due to the pin on this diagonal. So bishop has to come back to avoid the fork, but black pushes anyway and pins. So if you're not forking, you're going to be pinning. Always try and get your rooks on open files, guys. It's going to do some really good stuff. The queen comes up, attacking this pawn. That obviously has to be defended, but you can see White's rooks are not connected. This pawn is weak, and this bishop isn't really doing much. So even though black is down a piece, he has two pawns, and those pawns are doing a really good job of shutting out White's pieces. So yeah, given that, obviously Javokhir is rerouting his pieces. He's trying to get in bishop b4, rook e2, and as you can see, split rooks, never a good sign. Bishop b4, a5. So this bishop is locked. It's called an outpost. You always want to have your pieces on outposts, generally because they won't be vulnerable or subject to forks, attacks, skewers. At least it's better to have them defended. And the knight moves out of harm's way. The rook comes up. That's another purpose behind a5. It's a multi-purpose move, which is always good to look for in games. The rook comes up and is looking to enter the position via these three squares. The knight comes into the center, so it's actually improved. But queen g5 actually defends this pawn. And you can see the idea is to get the h-pawn going. So the pawn launches and attacks the knight, which has to come back. I mean, look at these pieces. You can hardly move. And the rook is stuck behind this pawn, so very practically difficult position for White to play. And you can see in time pressure, this is basically an impossible position to defend. c5 was the last mistake. The best move here, I'm pretty sure, was... Actually, I don't exactly remember, but I think knight b1 was the last try, but you never play a move like this in time pressure. But the idea behind knight b1 was obviously that if, like, say, king g7, king h7, then knight c3, and you can get your knight to d5. But, unfortunately, c5, obviously that pawn was under threat. And after rook takes c5, queen b3 check, king just steps to the side. And queen f7 was a big blunder because obviously he had overlooked the tactic. Rook takes c2, winning a piece. And if knight takes rook, bishop e6 wins the queen. So the king had to move, but now black is just a piece up. And Yuli mopped up this game really easily. Queen took the bishop took the knight. After queen f6, White resigned. He's down 4 pawns, and there's also a mating attack, so you have to exchange queens here. And obviously, black is just up 4 extra pawns. Hopeless endgame for White. If it was even 2 pawns, maybe you would try and save it, but 4 pawns is absolutely hopeless. So with that, actually, Caruana did win his game against, I forgot the name. Was it? I think it was Andrei Esipienko. No. Who did he? He beat somebody. I'm not sure. I think it was Wei Yi. Yeah, he beat Wei Yi in round 3. So they are still tied for first, and actually they play each other in game 4. So this is actually one of the first critical games of Javokhir's in chess career because he's playing the number 2 player. And we're gonna jump ahead to move uh over here, bishop d3. So obviously a very standard position has arisen out of a queen's gambit. Black has played b5, trying to get his bishop into the game, delay the development of this bishop, which could be a problem later because his king isn't castled. You notice white's king is already castled, but this is a pretty well-known opening. Black is trying to immediately launch counterplay on the queen side and in the center, and he's delaying his king side safety. So he develops his bishop, all natural stuff. But the knight comes to a5, the knight takes, and pawn takes pawn, and the knight comes to b3. Now, if you obviously move the rook, the knight takes c5, and black has made his knight a much better piece than it was on c6. It's attacking the bishop, it's controlling e4, and it's giving this bishop a lot more control over this diagonal. Oops, I misfired. So c6 was an amazing move, and obviously you can't take the rook because pawn takes bishop, followed by bishop a6 or even bishop e4, and white just has a huge advantage. This knight on a1 is not going to be doing anything. It's going to be out of the game. So bishop takes pawn and knight d4. Another great move because this forces the exchange of knights. If knight takes a1, knight takes c6. And again, this knight is out of the game on a1. The knight's going to come back to d4 and take away b3. And followed by bishop e4, rook d1, bishop d2, e4, and white just has all the initiative there. So the knight takes the knight, the pawn takes, and obviously you don't want to take on d4 because if you take on d4, then bishop e3, and white is developing with tempo and attacking the queen and ready to take here, and black's king is not castled yet, so you have to develop your pieces right now. First white plays rook, black plays rook g8, obviously, to attack this pawn, but yeah, white can easily defend that with g3. So white is playing for the win. He could have bailed out with bishop e4 and tried to trade pieces, but white is playing for the win. And f5 was probably a critical error from Caruana. I'm pretty sure a better move in this position would have been to take on d4, actually, inviting the bishop out, but then queen d5, and black has some nice play on this diagonal, which should be enough to equalize the game, although it is still tough, especially because Caruana was already at 34 minutes here on move 17. So similar situation to last game. But after bishop c4, you can't take on d4 because bishop takes e6. And after pawn takes, queen takes e6, check, forks king and rook. And if the queen comes in the way after bishop takes e6, then queen takes, and the bishop will retreat, and black has a horrendous pawn structure. So rook g4 instead to pressurize his pawn more. The bishop comes out to defend. Bishop d5, rook c1, and you just take a pawn here. White's up a pawn. And now it's very logical to exchange this strong bishop in the center because white is already up a pawn. Even with the centralized blockading rook, Sindarov plays very logically. He just takes it off of the board, pushes, or he just offers to exchange it, pushes forward the d5, and he doesn't mind giving away this b2 pawn because he knows that his advantage is good enough because he can take black's kingside pawns, and this is just too much now. The h pawn is coming down the board, supported by queen and bishop. The queen and rook are beautifully coordinated, and yeah, this game actually is going to be over very, very soon. Obviously, bishop d4, check. If you take, your king is going to be cut to pieces. And after this, rook c5, threatening rook c8, black actually resigned, because if rook a8 to defend, then you can actually play rook takes bishop, pawn takes, and bishop f6, and that will lead to checkmate. And obviously, if you take the bishop, then rook c8 wins the queen, and if rook c6, then h6, threatening queen 8, queen g7 mate, and if queen g8 to defend, then you can exchange everything and take that rook on c6. And it's a pretty simple win. So with that, Javokhir actually went into lead by 3.5 points, and Caruana fell back to 2.5. All right, moving on. We obviously had the game between Nakamura and Sindarov. Now, if Nakamura could win, he was still on -1. He would go back to 50%, and Sindarov would go to +2, which would actually make the tournament more interesting. So, to start off, we have a pretty well-known QTD declined and bishop b4 check. Now, a lot of people play here, instead of bishop d2, they play knight c3, as Carlsen did against Anand in game 5. But Nakamura said he'd prepared something special with this variation. Obviously, you have to take some guts to play both sides of this, because black is winning a pawn, but he's basically left white with the bishop pair and this tremendous bishop cutting across black's king, preventing him from castling. And yeah, white is way ahead in development. But over here, after castles, Nakamura messed up his preparation and he played h4. He should have played knight e4, which would have been followed by queen a5, or I think queen a5 check. Yes, is the main line. And complications arise from there, but you have to be prepared if you're playing this kind of opening. And he simply forgot what he was playing. And after queen a5, b4, the queen will come back to d8. It should be about even if both sides can find the right moves. But yeah, this is a way to like force a draw basically. If black plays the right moves, and if he doesn't, he loses. But instead he played h4, and you'll see the difference. After white castles, black is able to just sidestep the pin and defend the knight on e8 and play c5. Now obviously, with the knight on e4, that wouldn't be possible. So yeah, white is just down a bunch of pawns here, and black actually carefully converts. g6 here is a very important move, because if you don't do that, if you play knight takes bishop, rook takes g7 actually saves the game, because you don't give a check. You give a check on g1, not on g5. And after knight takes rook, you can play queen g5. Wait, I think, yeah, and then king h8, and okay, sorry about that. Little interruption, but I had to clarify one other line. Obviously, if knight takes rook, queen g5 check, and this is a perpetual check. You just go back and forth. And if black tries to play for the win, then let's just say after instead he goes king h8, queen takes, queen d8, queen g3, queen f6, then white has the absolutely amazing move bishop e7. And if queen takes bishop, then that's mate over there. And if rook takes bishop, then that's mate over here. So black's only option will be to go here. And white actually will be the only one pushing for a win here, because black's pieces are so bad. So instead of that, Javokhir correctly played g6. Let me just reload this though. Okay. And the bishop came to d5, was obviously threatened. Bishop e6, bishop takes b7, knight e2, forking queen and rook. The queen moved back, queen takes, knight takes, rook takes, king takes. And obviously it's opposite color bishops. Black has too much extra pawns here, 2 pawns up already, and rook d8 basically forces the issue, because black is threatening this pawn and is ready to take another pawn, and this bishop is pinned to the rook. So the bishops are traded, and black ended up being 3 pawns up, and that's just too much. But very clean conversion from Sindarov. You'll see how he does it. Bishop e4, and pawn takes. So he establishes the bishop on an outpost, like I mentioned earlier, and pawn takes, pawn out. King takes. Then the king comes all the way here, and pawn pushes through. It doesn't matter how many pawns white takes here. This bishop supports that pawn, and it won't be able to get back in time to blockade the a pawn. So white will have to give up the bishop, and then the king will just come and take this last pawn by force, and white will resign, or get checkmated. So with that, Javokhir went to an unbeatable 4.5 out of 5, which has been brilliant play in this past few games. I mean, to see that perpetual check and to calculate it out with so much time on the clock still. I mean, usually people would have a lot of time remaining, not have much time remaining, but he was just on a roll. So obviously next game he had against was Wei Yi. And in this game, things kicked off with him playing black again. Obviously, he did get 2 whites in the first 2 games, so that's why he gets 2 blacks now. And it's basically a knight c3 version of the king's pawn. So Wei Yi is trying something different. Remember, he is on -1. So he is obviously trying to come back in this tournament and also beat the leader. that's why he's trying this different opening. But things don't really go his way. A5 obviously is an excellent move to stop b4 and create space for the bishop. c6 drives the knight away, and black doesn't actually mind his pawns being double because his king is actually reasonably safe in the middle. It's got this bishop protecting b6, and the king can always hide on e7 if necessary, or like castle by hand, as we'll see later. So black is actually exerting some pressure down the g file, and then he plays a4, clamping down on this advance. Wei Yi decides to push. Takes, and b4 is coming, so in the meantime, black decides to push this knight out of the way. Now, why didn't he maybe take a3? Well, Sindarov actually was worried about this line, bishop c5, and bishop takes f6, attacking the queen. Queen takes, the rook skewers, and takes the rook. King d7 takes the rook. And obviously white is an exchange up, but black does have compensation. But Sindarov just didn't. I don't think Sindarov thought this was good. So I think he opted for a simpler continuation. I think I don't exactly know why black is all right here, but I don't know. Maybe there was something he missed. But yeah, it's not worth the risk. So instead he played bishop g4, looking to establish his bishop on this really strong square d4. And he gave this pawn back, so he's actually a pawn down instead of a pawn up. But he's completing his development, and his pieces are amazing. His rooks are on both open files. His queen is centralized. His bishop is on a great outpost, and he actually did end up winning his pawn back. Black's threats on the king side were too much, so Wei Yi gave the pawn back. But you'll notice he's at 15 minutes again. His opponent is short of time, and this bishop is now dislodged, and the king moves to safety to protect h7. The king gets out of this pin for the pawn. c5 now is played, and this bishop is absolutely a monster on d4. And f4 is played, and rook e8 actually is not the most precise move, but Wei, short of time, fails to capitalize on this and instead blunders with rook takes d6. The drawing continuation here actually would have been to play take on c5, and after pawn takes, play rook f3. And the idea is after queen e1, you can play rook d8, undermining white's support of the queen, or black's support of the queen, and that would actually lead to a draw because white will collect this pawn soon after. But Wei Yi missed that and instead went for this short of time, and he is now lost. And if queen takes queen, might as well show that this pawn is just too strong. So obviously black is ready to play second pawn, so white can't deal with both. And this is kind of what happened in the game. Wei Yi played queen f3, c4, so this is a passed pawn, and king f8 to get out of the check, c3. One line I did forget to show is obviously if queen h4 looking to give a perpetual, queen g3 covers the g file, and after pawn takes, this back rank mate has to be stopped, and then c4 followed by b5 is just too much, or not even b5, but you could literally just keep pushing the pawn, and it's a winning position for black in that endgame. He's a pawn up, so that's why Wei Yi went for queen g4 and this variation, but after c3, his position is actually lost. And after this move, Wei Yi actually resigned. He only had like 1 minute left, but he's actually lost because if pawn takes, simply play c2, and the rook cannot leave the back rank because queen. And if rook c1, actually doesn't even matter where the rook goes, but if it gives a check or plays here, or on the back rank somewhere, we play rook e2, and then we're playing rook d1 and rook d2 to d1 next two moves, and this king is cut off, and there is nothing white can do to prevent black from queening. So Wei Yi understandably saw that and resigned after reflection. So with that, Sindarov went to +5, and he is going to the halfway point on 5.5 out of 6. Obviously, in the next game, he had white against Giri. There isn't really anything notable about this game. You can see most of this is just uh, standard opening theory, and they liquidate into a endgame where Sindarov had a little bit of an advantage actually, but unlike most of his opponents, Giri wasn't under any serious time pressure, which made it very difficult for Sindarov to make him make mistakes. Around here, he did miss one chance, which was instead of taking on d5, the computer actually likes playing rook c2 and applying pressure on the c file more because its knight is a much better piece than the bishop. But Sindarov a little bit understandably rushed it and didn't really see the win, or not even. It wasn't even a win. It was a maybe a little bit of an advantage, like +1. But it's a very difficult move to play, and Anish Giri sacked his rook for the knight for a exchange. Now there is actually a pretty funny draw here, I think, which is actually bishop takes g4. But I have to verify this because let me just make sure. Check. And if the king moves up this way, then you get the rook. King goes up this way, you check again. King has to go back, check, check, check. And yeah, the king can't leave the defense of this rook, so this actually is a perpetual check. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I believe I am right. But instead, Giri went for something else. He just traded the rooks. And king f7, king e7. And this is actually a theoretical draw because white can't get in anywhere with his king. All these squares are covered by the bishop on this diagonal, and obviously the e5 square is controlled by the pawn, and the king is going to be able to not be forced out of controlling the e7 square. If the king gets to e7, the game is actually over. It'll be a white win, but Anish Giri doesn't allow that and keeps his king here, and the bishop will always have an extra square to move to. The rook can't force it off of this diagonal, so eventually Sindarov gives up and decides to trade pawns, and actually Sindarov actually won a pawn temporarily, but the bishop came here, checked, and one last trick is don't go to h5 here because after king f4 you're actually lost. But the goal for bishop versus rook is to get the bishop in this place and the king in the dark square corner. You want the king in the opposite color corner as the bishop. So the bishop, with understanding this and having respect for his opponent, Sindarov just took the bishop off and they agreed to draw there. So this marks the halfway stage of the tournament. In the next episode, I will go over the remaining half and how Sindarov kind of coasted to the finish line because he's already at 6 out of 7. So it is very hard for any player to stop that because his closest competitor in round 7 actually lost to Nakamura, and that was Caruana. So Caruana was knocked back to 4.5 out, or was it 4 out of 7, I believe. So he was at 4 points out of 7, and it was basically impossible for him to catch up. And we'll see how that phases out in the next episode. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.